Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar Khan. I'm your host, and today I'm going to talk to you about the JCPOA, the basically nuclear treaty that, well, you can't call it a nuclear treaty, but it was a kind of a nuclear agreement that was signed between P5 and Germany, the P6 as they called it, and Iran in order to ensure that Iran does not pursue its nuclear ambitions. This was the 2015 treaty. This was one of the key elements of Obama's foreign policy legacy. And in exchange for not essentially pursuing the nuclear option, Iran would have many of the sanctions lifted against it and would also have access not just to frozen assets but also to the opportunity to trade with the rest of the world. This was going to transform Iran economically, make it a much more important economy. It is one of the top 20 economies in the world at the moment and has tremendous potential, as one of the biggest reserves of oil and natural gas can be found in Iran. But before I give you the latest update, please subscribe to Khanversations. You know the drill. Subscribe to Khanversations, press the bell icon, like the video, and do share it with your students, your friends, and colleagues. So where are we? The JCPOA was signed in 2015, and then when Donald Trump became president, he withdrew the United States unilaterally from JCPOA, basically saying it was a bad deal. It did not put limitations on Iran's militaristic adventures in the Middle East and all the problems that Iran was causing for Israel, for Saudi Arabia, and for the United States in the Middle East with its proxies. And so basically anything short of regime change was unacceptable for Donald Trump and Israel. And so basically at the behest of the Israeli government, which was always opposed to the JCPOA, Netanyahu had made a big point to come here and insult Obama in the Capitol in a joint session of the Senate and the U.S. Congress to essentially preach against the JCPOA. So when Donald Trump withdrew unilaterally, Iran decided to start enriching uranium, and it has reached, they say, 60% purification, and it has also reached about 7 kilos in total amount of purified uranium that it has. Apparently, in order to be able to make a bomb, you need a certain amount of nuclear material, and that also has to be at 90 degrees level. It takes a while for people to be able to accumulate the amount of material necessary to make a bomb, besides having the capacity to make the bomb and also then having the capacity to deliver the bomb. So Iran at the moment does not have the capacity, according to many, to actually design the bomb, and its missiles are not capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. But it has reached a certain volume, according to some reports, is 6.7 kilos of 60% enriched uranium. So Biden, in his campaign, promised to go back into JCPOA, making the argument that the JCPOA was the best and perhaps the only instrument available to the West to ensure that Iran does not become a nuclear power. Other than that, the sanctions have proven that they don't work in terms of changing the behavior of countries. They do hurt the population of the countries, definitely, but they do not change the behavior. Sanctions have never worked. You can see sanctions on Russia are not working, sanctions on China did not work, sanctions on Iraq did not work, and sanctions on Iran have also not had an impact on its policies. So JCPOA, a deal in which Iran not only opens itself for very close monitoring of its nuclear activity, but also promises not to pursue the bomb, would have been the best way to prevent Iran becoming a nuclear power, but the price of that would be to ignore Iran's other political activities and to include it into the world economy, which would give it more resources to create more trouble for Western countries. So that was essentially the trade that the West was willing to make, and Biden promised to get the U.S. back into the JCPOA. As far as Iran was concerned, it was only the US which was in violation of the JCPOA. The other 5 countries and Iran were sort of in compliance. And then Iran started enriching uranium, I think, as essentially to use it as a leverage to force the United States to get back into JCPOA. Now, the Europeans and the US are not on the same page on this. So the Europeans, after the US, after Donald Trump imposed secondary sanctions, which means sanctions on companies which trade with Iran, even though their countries deem it legitimate. So because the other 5 countries were still part of JCPOA, legally, from their point of view, they could trade with Iran. However, the US imposed sanctions, which means that if they traded, then they could not do business in the United States or with US companies. So these secondary sanctions were essentially a reason why Iran-Europe trade did not really boom the way one had anticipated in 2015. It still remains around $5 billion. Iran exports about $1 billion worth of stuff to Europe and imports about $4 billion worth of stuff. So it's a very small volume. And this is facilitated by an initiative taken by France, Britain, and Germany called INSTEX, INSTEX, which basically is a barter system. So the goods are exchanged, they avoid the dollar and avoid US sanctions. So it's through a barter system that Britain, France, and Germany continue to trade with Iran. And now 6 other European countries have joined INSTEX. So even if JCPOA is not revitalized with the re-entry of the US, it is possible that Iran-US trade will increase. For a long time, the United States insisted on, by a long time, since Biden became president, until about August of this year, the United States has imposed sanctions on IRGC, military and paramilitary force in Iran, which is seen as fundamentally responsible for oppression at home as well as acting abroad as a terrorist organization supporting various proxies. And so designating IRGC as a terrorist organization by the United States and imposing specific sanctions on it was opposed by the Iranians. And so any progress on the JCPOA was not happening because Iran had that precondition. However, in August, Iran dropped that precondition, essentially leaving the US with no other option but to move forward on JCPOA. And then 2 other things have happened in the past few months, which have made it politically difficult for Western countries to get back into the JCPOA, even if Iran fully agrees to all the conditions. And those 2 things are essentially the fact that Iran has been selling drones to Russia, and those drones are having a devastating impact on Ukraine's basically power infrastructure. So the Western countries feel that, especially the United States feels that the UN should be investigating whether the sale of those drones violates UN sanctions, and somehow Iran needs to be penalized for selling those drones to Russia, which are basically devastating Ukraine. These are the kamikaze drones which just go and explode on impact. And they've already started. I think the US is already imposing sanctions on Chinese companies and other companies which have facilitated this sale to Russia. And the second thing is that since the protests in Iran have increased and the Iranian government has responded in an extremely repressive fashion, killing more than 1,000 protesters and basically putting a display of brutality for the entire world to watch. And that also makes it very difficult to suddenly start trading with a country which is being so brutal to its own population. So those are the 2 things that are making it difficult for politicians to re-enter the JCPOA. But the Europeans still feel that using the JCPOA, revitalizing it, and preventing Iran from achieving nuclear power capability is so much more important and so much more critical that the sale of the drones to Russia, as well as oppressive treatment of its own population, while troublesome and despicable, should not essentially should be treated separately, should be compartmentalized, and the JCPOA debates and dialogue and discussion should not be impacted by these two developments. It's far more difficult because the US Congress is less in mood to accept JCPOA than it was, say, before these protests started and before the news that Iran was selling drones to Russia came about. So far, the Iranians have only one condition left, and they are saying that IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, had started an investigation of Iranian nuclear sites where nuclear particles were found, and they want an explanation as to why these nuclear particles were detected in these places. And Iran has not yet provided a satisfactory explanation for what IAEA has done. There is talk about getting the US to put pressure on IAEA to end its investigations. That's what Iran is trying to do. But the US has said that if it's not going to interfere, if IAEA is satisfied that Iran has provided an adequate explanation, then the US will accept IAEA's reports. So essentially, Iran, which has had a problematic relationship with IAEA for a while, and one of the first things that Iran had done after the JCPOA withdrawal of Donald Trump was to shut down some of the cameras that IAEA was using to observe nuclear activities at nuclear facilities in Iran. So we don't know what is going to happen. It is very clear that there are some very strong opposition. The Republican Party in the US is opposed to reinvigorating the JCPOA. Israel is strongly opposed to it, and Netanyahu is now back as Prime Minister of Israel, and he's going to put a lot more pressure on the US. And the Saudi and the Gulf countries are also opposed to this, and they have essentially signaled. But as far as the Saudis and the Israelis, etc., are concerned, they are in a catch-22 situation. They don't want to see Iran empowered economically by removal of sanctions if JCPOA is activated. But if that doesn't happen, then they might have to face a nuclear Iran in the near future. And the Saudis have sent the signal that if Iran begins to approach nuclear capability, so will they. So basically, there is a possibility of seeing a nuclear arms race between the Arabs and the Persians beginning if JCPOA is not reactivated. The Israelis are already in nuclear power, with some estimates say they have more than 200 nuclear power. They also have biological and chemical weapons, so they do have this weapons of mass destruction stockpiles. So what's going to happen in the near future? I don't know. I suspect that there will be a lot of pressure from Europe on the United States to go ahead with JCPOA. Biden, in a conversation during the midterm elections, a woman asked him if JCPOA was dead, and would he declare that it was dead. So Biden said basically that I will not declare that JCPOA is dead, even though it is dead. And so the woman said that how can you sign a treaty or agreement with a government that is not representative of his people? And Biden gave a very interesting answer, a very clever answer actually. He said, well, when they have a nuclear weapon, which they will soon, they will be representing that nuclear weapon, and that is why we are negotiating with Iran. So, I mean, lots of attention has been paid to that video, suggesting that that is how President Biden thinks that in the mind of President Biden, the JCPOA is dead.
President Biden, could you please announce that JCPOA is dead? Can you just announce that? No. No, why not? We just don't want any deals with the Mullahs. No deals. They don't represent us. They're not our government.
However, a lot of experts in Washington and think tanks, etc., feel that the US and the West has basically no other option but to pursue diplomacy with Iran. Even if JCPOA dies down, it does not mean that that is the end of diplomacy with Iran. They will have to continue to ensure in some way or the other that Iran does not essentially pursue a nuclear option. Iran doesn't need nuclear weapons. Iran does not want nuclear weapons. At least that is the message that they have been sending. What Iran wants is to be reintegrated into the global economy. So it's heartening that all the conditions that Iran had have been dropped, and I'm hoping that the IAEA also concludes its investigations in a way that will move the JCPOA forward. It's very interesting because if that does not happen, then you are going to see a very strange nexus of states. Iran, Russia, both of them are going to become vassal states to China. That would be far more problematic for the Middle East as well as for Europe. So let's hope that something positive happens in the next few months with regards to JCPOA. So I hope you found this analysis and this briefing on the JCPOA interesting and useful. And if so, then please subscribe to Khanversations, like the video, ring the bell icon, and share it with all your friends, colleagues, and students. If you're professors who are watching this, I have had at least 12 papers written this semester by my students on how to move forward on the JCPOA. So anyway, take care, everybody. Happy holidays, and I'll see you soon. There will be a series of very interesting conversations that I'll be putting out in the next week or two. So stay tuned, stay alert. All the best.